Welcome on in. WIP Daily, Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following the podcast. Of course, our YouTube feed, 94 WIP. Check it out there. Tucker Bagwell will join me in a little bit as the Eagles summer continues here. And yesterday was kind of one of those tentpole moments of the Eagles preseason and summer and training camp we're not that far away, a week away from their first preseason game, but they held their open practice last night. And I'd say about, 8 years ago, they started doing the open practices, and they would do 2 of them, and eventually that moved to 1. And I've gone to, I think, the last 3 or 4. I think one of them may have been canceled with COVID. They didn't do it that year, but certainly the last 3 or 4 I was at. And I take my kids every year, and it's like, it's the one chance for. I notice a lot of kids there. Kids get a chance to see the Eagles, unless you want to go to a preseason game, but that's a whole different thing. It's like that old training camp, tradition of seeing the team, and you get to do it here in this venue. And the Eagles, to their credit, usually put on a good, fun practice. They don't structure it like the normal practices. Like when we do the shows at the NovaCare complex, that's a regular, they're just doing their thing. And then they happen to maybe pop on the air with us and talk, but it's like they're operating as if nobody is there. For this, I will say that they structure the practice to make it more interesting from a viewer perspective. Like they have, They keep score in terms of the offense versus the defense, not touchdowns, not 7, but like you get points for a stop and all that. So it's more enjoyable, I would say, to watch than your standard practice, and it keeps people involved. So I have some takeaways from watching practice last night I want to get into here. Some of them I think have been kind of largely reported for the past couple of days. Some of them just what I noticed last night. And we'll talk some big picture stuff as well when Tucker hops on. All right, so the first thing, and obviously the biggest thing, is the way Jalen Hurts is playing and his accuracy with the football. The biggest thing I've noticed with Hurts, or noticed last night, he's moving well. And that's what I wondered about coming into the season. Now, I wouldn't say anyone's out of the woods yet in terms of if you have some trepidation about how Jalen Hurts' legs are going to age and his yards per carry have gone down the last couple of years. And last year, we know he looked so slow with the knee injury. I will say just eye test. First time I was at camp last week, and then here with Jalen Hurts last night at Lincoln Financial Field, he looks quicker, he looks faster, he looks more spry the way he had in years past. Now, I think the big thing with this is going to be, can that hold up over the full season? How many hits will he take? I think a lot of great runners look good in the summer because he hasn't been hit. He hasn't been touched since January. So that's a part of it. But I did have a question, and I said one of the first things I wondered when we got to training camp was, how did Jalen Hurts' legs look? Well, I have my answer. They look good. They look fine. They look like he's ready to move well again and to pick up first downs with his legs. And, last year there were just plays that he didn't make that in the past maybe he would have made something out of. You go back, if you go back and watch the highlight of the Jalen Hurts run against the New Orleans Saints in 2021, his first year as a starter, when he put his knee in the ground and cut back and ran for a touchdown. He didn't do that last year. I mean, there were plays for week 1 against New England where he planted and just kind of fell. We don't know exactly when he got hurt. Was it Minnesota week 2? Was it the Rams week 4 or 5, whenever that was? I don't know. But there was a play late in the season against Arizona, and at that point, he really wasn't on the injury report much. So it wasn't a severe thing. But whatever it was, he planted his knee in the ground, and he couldn't cut back. I mean, they got him right away. So you wonder, what a player that's taken a lot of hits, over 1,100 carries since he was at Alabama, has he lost a step? I didn't see that last night. So that's encouraging. He's throwing the football well. I noticed last night, and I've seen all of the reports and all of Elliott's camp stats. I know Jones throwing the football particularly well and accurately, and touchdowns and no interceptions at camp. It seems like he's picked up this offense from Kellen Moore very quickly, and that's great. The one thing I will say, and I'll get to my next takeaway with this, I notice when you're at these practices, the quarterbacks wear the red jerseys, and a lot of times pressure will get there from the defense. And if it's a real game, if it's it's live, I think the quarterback's getting hit, or he has to throw the football away before he actually gets hit, or run away before he actually gets hit, because action's going to happen. In these practices, there's like an extra second where, I'm just using a name, like Jalen Carter's right here in front of his face, Jalen Hurts, or Kenny Pickett last night, whoever, and he just kind of takes an extra step, moves, and then bombs the ball down the field. Is that going to happen in a real game? Probably not. So the stats are accurate and they tell a story. I do think there's something to it. The flow of it's a little bit different. And would that throw have even been attempted if it wasn't if it was a real game? So I just want to throw that caveat on there because there was a few of those last night where like the pass rush got there. They didn't blow the whistle. Now, one time they did blow the whistle. Pickett was basically like about to be wrapped up, like gently, but wrapped up. And they, the ref there, whoever they have refereeing this thing, blew the whistle. But I do think a lot of it is they get an extra half a second, they throw the football. But Jalen looks good. Second takeaway, I have some concerns with the depth on the offensive line. They're without some guys right now. Dickerson in practice last night. Steen has been out. I'm not sure how serious that is. The Eagles keep downplaying it, but first preseason game is next week, and Tyler Steen doesn't look like he's ready to suit up. I don't know how long that's going to be. I have serious questions with Mekhi Becton as a viable guard and a starter. And I just noticed last night, based on who they had in there, a lot of pressure from the defense. And that's why Jalen was moving a lot. And the fans love that, and there's oohs and ahs. But he had to slide around the pocket and move and scramble because there was a lot of pressure. And I know they don't have their full offensive line, and I'm not pushing the panic button, but I think this offensive line is more of a question than it has been in a long time. So the offensive line allowed a good amount of pressure last night. Third takeaway is I saw quite a few snaps early in the practice with Devontae Smith in the slot. I think it's really interesting to see how the Eagles line up their receivers, and I think we'll see more versatility and line them up at different places. Other teams do this all the time. The Vikings get Justin Jefferson in matchups. The Cowboys down the stretch last year got CeeDee Lamb in matchups, not just left or right or X or Y or outside. No, if the opponent has a weak slot or the middle of their defense is a little bit of weaker than their outside corners, well, why don't you put your best guy or one of your best guys, and the Eagles have two of them, in the slot and create a mismatch. Devontae Smith, when he came out of the draft, the question was, would his size, would he hold up, but also could he play outside? He answered those questions. He obviously could play outside, but I always thought with Devontae Smith, he'd be dominant in the slot if you put him there with his shiftiness and his wiry strength and his ability to catch the ball, in weird positions with really good hands. I think Devontae would be a really good slot depending on the matchup and who the corner is. And I saw him a few times out there. So it'll be interesting to see if the Eagles do that during the season. Now, part of that is who's going to be the third receiver, and can that guy play outside? That kind of versatility matters. I think if it's a John Ross, who was a top 10 pick and certainly can line up outside, then you could do that with Devontae. Same thing with Paris Campbell. You could do that with Devontae. If it's the guy I want to get to next, well, then probably Devontae has to stay outside. And that name I want to get to next in my takeaways is I kind of laughed off the idea when training camp began and the Eagles had their competition at wide receiver for the third spot that Britton Covey could be part of this. I know last year down the stretch, he got some snaps in week 18 because they had all the injuries and AJ got hurt during that game. But I didn't buy it. And as camp has gone on, we've heard more reports that he's getting some time in the slot and he's played well. And heard yesterday that LA told us that he is watching Cole Beasley tape from the old Cowboys offenses with Kellen Moore. And I heard that comp. I was like, yeah, that kind of could work. And I thought about the old Howard Eskin versus Cole Beasley battle on Twitter, which made me laugh. But okay, so I kind of said, all right, let's see what he looks like. So I'm there last night watching. He looked viable. I'm not overwhelmed by it. I'm not like ready to go out and say he's going to have a 600-yard season, but he didn't look overmatched. He looked viable. He got open a couple times on kind of option routes where he looked like he was, running that, 7-8 yards and then make a decision to go cut in or cut out. And he made the right decision, and he got very open on a couple of them. And Jalen, kind of a pitch and catch by the sideline, easy play, would have been a first down if it was a live period. So, or, a game kind of condition. I think Britton Covey has more of a chance to play wide receiver this year than I gave any credit for or gave any credence to a couple weeks ago. And part of that is he's obviously progressed in his career as a football player, not just a returner. And then the relative lack of options they have are like great options. John Ross has been in and out of the league and not done much in years. Paris Campbell, look at his numbers last year, and it's like, is that a viable starting receiver or close to starting receiver? Probably not. And then you have some young guys. Oh, Johnny Wilson got some work in the red zone last night. That was interesting because he's 6'6". Aeneas Smith looks like he's a little bit green and raw. We'll see how he comes along. But unless they acquire a wide receiver, one of these names that I'm talking about right now is going to play. and going to get playing time. I mean, Eagles are suddenly going to become an I formation team or a strictly 2 tight end team, especially when the backup tight ends or the second tight ends are not, of big note. So they're going to have a lot of snaps, like most NFL teams do, with 3 wide receivers. And Britton Covey has a chance to be one of those. Or speaking of a chance to be something, maybe more than we thought early in his career, I tell you, one of the biggest just like eye-popping moments for me last night. I know the crowd got all revved up for Saquon Barkley, and it was cool to watch him run early and catch a few passes early. But what hit me was when they went to second team and third team, Will Shipley, the young running back, the rookie they took in the 4th round out of Clemson, he has real burst. And sometimes with running backs, especially young running backs just enter the league, you don't need to see much more than that. Like, you just watch him run the ball or carry the football a couple times. Like, he's got burst. He doesn't really. And the feeling I had watching Shipley last night, really for the first time in person, and honing in on him, it reminded me of the feeling I had when I watched Corey Clement in his rookie training camp with the Eagles in 2017. I was out of practice that year, and I was like, man, he's got burst. Now, he was an undrafted player, and that was his work up the depth chart was obviously more of a trek, and eventually he did it in 100 yards in the Super Bowl receiving. But when I watched Shipley last night, I was like, he has real burst. And, I know the plan or the hope for a lot of people, and we'll see what the Eagles' plan is, but Saquon Barkley has an offensive player of the year type of season and Christian McCaffrey kind of impact. We'll see. A lot of debate has gone on about how much they'll actually use him. They sold Kenny Gainwell in the last year of his deal, and we know they trust him in pass protection, so Gainwell will be part of this. But when I saw Shipley run, I thought to the likelihood of an inevitable probably injury or there's weeks where Saquon's banged up and they want to save his legs, I think Shipley can give him some good snaps. I think there's something there with Will Shipley. And the last thing before we get Tucker's take on, what he heard for practice last night, saw, and just in general with my takeaways, is the attendance last night was so big. I don't even know if the parking lots were ready for it. It took a while to kind of get in there last night, but 50,000 or about that is what the Eagles announced. That's a huge crowd for an open practice. I remember when they first started this 2016, I think it was like in the 20s or 30s combined for 2 practices. So I'm not sure if it was a shift to a Thursday versus Sunday because they've been doing it on Sundays. That got more people to go. People are just excited. Saquon thing, I don't know. But it was a very, very well-attended practice last night with close to 50,000. Tucker, what's your feeling on, based on my takeaways? The Covey thing, I think he might play some receiver here, which I did not expect. And I do think the offensive line, just in general, is a little bit more of a question than it has been in a long time.
Yeah, I think depth on offense is more of a question than it has been in recent years. And if you weren't at open practice like I was, you can go back, you can listen to Elliot Sherparks and Jack Fritz basically call open practice for 2 hours in the Go Birds podcast feed. So you can check that out if you missed it, or if you were there and just want to hear them chat for a couple of hours. But I think really at receiver, it's interesting because we talked about when they hired Kellen Moore about the idea of maybe Devontae Smith playing in the slot, the way Keenan Allen played in the slot in San Diego, the way CeeDee Lamb played in the slot in Dallas. And he kind of fits that profile, right? He's a great route runner. He's a little bigger than most slot receivers, or at least taller, not necessarily heavier, but he would kind of fit that kind of profile. I think Keenan Allen's a guy that he kind of fits what he does, especially coming out of college. That was a guy he got some comps out of. But you kind of look down the depth chart, they don't have really anybody else who can play outside receiver. If you were to put him in the slot and A.J. Brown outside, that third slot or that third spot on the other outside is kind of an interesting spot. And when you look at the guys that they have in John Ross, in Britton Covey, in Paris Campbell, they mostly have been slot guys, at least for John Ross and Paris Campbell. Britton Covey obviously hasn't played a lot offensive snaps in his career so far, but it's going to be really interesting to see how Kellen Moore deploys this because they have talent on offense, right? I don't think anybody's doubting that they have elite weaponry across the board, but if you get to a point where you did last year where, you were playing without Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown in Week 18, you were without A.J. Brown in the playoff game against Tampa Bay, it could get dicey because I just don't think this wide receiver group really goes, 4 or 5 deep the way it did maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah,
it doesn't. And I think the young guys, it's probably an uphill climb for them to make an impact. One thought I had, and they didn't do this last night, and they might hold this close to vest. This might be like a week a week 4 thing. They just roll it out. It wouldn't shock me. I think about the McCaffrey comp to Saquon Barkley. If they're not getting good production out of the slot, and they obviously trust Kenny Gainwell, and I think Shipley's got some juice to him, that what if Saquon Barkley lined up in the slot for a couple snaps here and there, or big moments, and then you have Gainwell or Shipley in the background, in the backfield? I think that could be a matchup nightmare. I mean, we've seen the Niners do it. The Niners they line up McCaffrey on the outside sometimes, and it's not so much always to throw him the football. I mean, it could be more of a decoy. It just creates matchup issues. And how's the other team going to defend it? Where they're going to move are they putting a linebacker on him? Are they putting a safety on him? Would they actually put a corner on him? And then could you run some sort of screen off that where you get him in space? So there's a lot of different ways they might be able to do it. But it was a fun practice last night. Eagles always do that well, and almost 50,000 there last night. So cool event. And I think there's some interesting things going on, especially the Shipley thing, Devontae in the slot, and Jalen looks good right now. But keep an eye on that offensive line depth. That's it's different, and I have questions about what they even have up front with the starters for the first time in a long time, especially at the right guard position. I appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following WIP Daily. Have a great weekend. We'll talk soon.